For the second time since I've lived in San Angelo, we are treated truly to have you, Zenobia Harris, who is a Central grad and so incredibly highly successful. And it is my great pleasure, and you have just stepped off an airplane coming from Shreveport, where you are now, for a year, been the law clerk for...
the Honorable Carl E. Stewart. He's a judge on the Federal Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals.
Which is not just a little position.
I don't consider it little. A few weeks ago, I was wondering if I was like an important employee if the government shut down, but to me, it's not little.
Well, this time last year when you came, you knew you were headed there from your law practice in Houston. Now, let's back up, because some people will be watching this interview who maybe don't remember how you got to where you are. I want to tell you how far back I want you to take us.
Okay.
Your mom, who is the great Major Regina Harris, and your dad, one of my favorite people, Johnny Harris, who's at Lee Middle School. Your mom came here to take over the ROTC at Lakeview your junior or senior year in high school.
The middle of my junior year.
Okay, see, I got it.
Good memory.
And when you came to town mid-year after living a life of being a military child, young person, you thought you wanted to go to pick up some electives in theater or...
Speech and debate, and then Texans, so...
But my memory is you didn't get necessarily your first choice, but got put in debate.
Yes, I wanted to be in the theater program at Central so bad, but they didn't have space for me at the time.
At the semester. So you got put in debate, and little did you know perhaps the mark that would make on your career.
Huge
All right, start right there.
So I started, Barbara McCain, she used to be the speech and debate teacher at Central. She just sort of took me under her wing, and she's like, you're going to go to speech camp like I used to go to when I was younger at West Texas A&M. And so I went, and I met the head of the speech and debate program at the time. His name was Guy Yates, and he looked at me and he said, Zenobia. And he has a Southern accent. He was like, Zenobia, you will be something big one day. You just don't know it. And I was like, really? And so I was like, it was really great to hear that from somebody who's well respected all over the country in speech and debate. And so I went back to school. I competed mostly in debate, Lincoln Douglas debate, which is individual one-on-one debate. And the new speech coach at West Texas A&M called my parents and was like, I heard your daughter's looking at other schools. I want her to come here. I'm starting the speech and debate team from scratch here, or like revamping it, because over the years it's sort of declined. And I want her to be part of the new regime. So he brought me in. I ended up winning a national title 4 years later, being the #1 speaker in the country. And I went off to graduate school at the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa. People are really familiar with Tuscaloosa recently with all the tornadoes. I've been in contact with them recently, my old boss. And then I was sort of at a juncture at that point, because I'd been coaching speech and debate. I'd been studying the civil rights movement in rural Alabama, and I was like, what do I do now? And so I spoke with a lot of people, and they were like, have you thought about going to law school instead of going to get your PhD? And I was like, law school? I've heard of a few great lawyers like Thurgood Marshall and some people like that.
And I do like to debate.
I like to talk. I like, and I love to read and research and write, which are very important, outside of speaking for the law. And so I was like, I'll give this a try. And I went, and I hated it. I hated
You're kidding me.
The first, because law school is not, it's not Legally Blonde. It's not, well, actually it is a lot like Legally Blonde. The first semester is very rough. You feel totally out of water. And I spent a lot of time doubting, my decision,
And now where did you go to law school?
At Northwestern University in Chicago.
Okay, got you. You skipped that.
Oh, so I went.
I don't want to skip.
I got accepted into this amazing law school. At the time, it was in the top 10 law schools in the country. I really didn't know about rankings, but I found out that it was really well ranked. And so I was excited about moving to Chicago, but it was one of those times where I was challenged. I was really challenged because I came from a background where I was doing a lot of performance, doing a lot of speech and debate, and it was very structured. But law school challenges you to think outside of yourself and to think within the confines of the law. And that's a very different way of thinking, because an outcome that I wouldn't agree with is what the law requires. And so I really had to focus on that, because I might not agree with such and such being guilty or such and such being innocent, but I had to understand that this is not about me, it's about our justice system. And so after I graduated, I ended up going to the Texas Supreme Court and clerking for Justice Del Wainwright. And I got offered a job at Vincent & Elkins at the law firm. And around the same time I got offered a clerkship with Judge Stewart, he said I could go to my job with the law firm first, and he'd like me to come back after the first year. And so here I am at the end of my clerkship with Judge Stewart, and getting ready to go back to Houston in my law firm.
And prior to this interview, you told me that this had stretched you sometimes beyond your understanding of yourself, how much you could be stretched.
Right.
Talk about that.
Well, I turned 30 in September. It doesn't seem like very old to a lot of people, but, I've been in school for most of my life, and when I graduated from law school, I had my first real job working with a boss, where there was no protection from school, like at graduate school or anything like that. And I dealt with mostly civil law, which, there's a distinction between civil and criminal law. Civil lawyers deal with contracts, insurance, even when somebody gets hit by a car, a lot of times some of those things can deal with civil law. But then criminal law is, people going to jail and prison and, death sentences and things like that. And I'd never experienced that before this year. So this year has really forced me to really appreciate challenges, because for the past 2 years, it has been very challenging, but I've sort of felt like I was in the comfort zone, But this year has really forced me to step outside of myself and figure out things that I could improve. And I feel like it's been a blessing. And at the same time, at times a curse when I'm up late at night trying to figure out the law to make sure I get it right. But it's been a blessing because I think tests are a blessing. You don't get very many tests in your life. People have children, that's a test, I've heard. Being married, that's a test, I've heard. But I think that, before those challenges, I've had the opportunity to look at myself in my career and figure out how I can improve and continue to grow. So, it's been a little bit stressful at times, but I think it's just been a true blessing that I've had, first of all, my judge to be there for me, to answer my questions, and at the same time, have a chance to grow and educate myself as an attorney.
All right, you've had a year of dealing with some criminal law, and we discussed that there were death penalty issues involved in that, and how you've rethought and perhaps modified your preconceived notions. Are you tempted now to go criminal? Are you happy to be back in the civil realm?
Well, thank you. That's a great question, because one thing that this job has taught me is the importance of giving back to the community. And for attorneys, that's extremely important, and I'm about to dip into my nerdy side. But the law represents our social contract, and it works best when both parties are represented by good attorneys, And if attorneys are not doing pro bono work, and that are at these big law firms and they're not doing pro bono work, then they are actually doing a disservice to our justice system. They can represent all these million-dollar clients, but if they're not taking the time to help somebody, especially somebody who's been charged with a crime, then they have really done a disservice. And the state bar in Texas, they don't have a requirement that every attorney do pro bono hours, but they strongly encourage it. And like at Vincent & Elkins, my law firm actually my law firm going back to in the fall actually gives credit to attorneys as though it was a big billable client if they do pro bono hours. And something that my judge points out every time we're argument, all the judges on the Fifth Circuit usually recognize attorneys who are representing somebody for free because they were court appointed. So I don't prefer criminal law, but I do know that it's important for me to understand it in case somebody is in need and I can step in. So. And
you were already, if I remember, doing some pro bono work before you left to do this clerkship.
And I'm going to do it again when I go back. My client's case has been stayed. He was right now his allegations against the city of Houston are that he was he was actually put in jail, wrongfully imprisoned, and I'm not handling that aspect of his case. But when I go back, I'll be handling his case as far as harassment from police officers, you know. And so I did do that, and I'm going to go back to doing that when I return to the firm in the fall. And my firm was totally supportive, you know, that I was just there for like 8 months before I went to my clerkship with giving me time and the resources to do this. I also helped somebody who was seeking a pardon. I don't know if I told you last time, he wants to become a teacher. And when he was 20 years old, he wanted to help his girlfriend, and he made an egregious error and decided to sell drugs. He was 20 years old, and now he's 35. And he's still, you know, dealing with the repercussions of that horrible mistake. But he wants to try to educate kids because he has all this life experience from having made a mistake and mistakes afterwards that he wants to give back. But of course, you can't be licensed to be a teacher if you're a felon. And so I worked with him to help him get a pardon. He finished his teaching certification program. I was really proud of that. And so now he's just waiting for to hear back from the governor. So,
wow.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that.
Well, I'm not surprised that the daughter of Johnny and Regina Harris has a huge element of their heart that wants to give back, because both of your parents are huge givers to this community and to young people. And so is that DNA or is that environment? Maybe some of both.
Well, I think it's definitely some of both, because I mean, even my dad's mom, she like feeds hungry people under the bridge in San Antonio. So it's sort of a part of our family. Like my sister volunteer coaches, you know, and I think now she's actually doing that as a full-time job. But my sister's always been around students and done a lot of volunteer work. My brother does Big Brothers Big Sisters. Like we're all have been taught that that's important, and it's I guess part of DNA, but it's also surrounding ourselves with people who do that kind of work. And on that note, I choose to be around people who have the same feelings that I do. For example, my boyfriend is a teacher in the 5th Ward in Houston, and I mean, if I didn't know my parents, then I would say he is like the only teacher I know who gives 100%, having seen it firsthand, you know? I mean, a lot of people are like, oh, teachers have 3 months off in the summer and you get 2 weeks off here and there. And I'm like, no. I mean, I swear that he works more than me, even when I'm billing hours at the law firm. I mean, I call my parents at 8:30 at night and they're sleeping so they can be at work early in the morning to be there for their students. And my mom takes her kids on senior trips. In other words, I think that, you know, I surround myself with people who believe in giving back, so it makes me feel like it's just normal to do the same.
And it feels really good.
It really feels
really feels good. There's nothing else that you can substitute for that feel. All right, Zenobia, are you finished with your clerkship? So you go right up through the summer? And then go back to Vincent Elkins in the early fall. Well, will you be worn out?
I think I will. I think that
more intellectually worn out?
Yeah, happily so. I mean, I don't like to be bored. I think that's the worst thing in the world. My mom used to make us do chores when we told her we were bored, so I think I've learned that that's not a good place to be. So I will be intellectually worn out, but it's almost like when you're working out. You know, you work out really, really hard, and then you're like sore, and then when it's over, you know that your muscles have rebuilt, you know, and they're stronger. This sounds so corny, but it's totally true. It's intellectually true. Like, even now when I talk to people about things, all of a sudden, like, information bursts in my head that I've learned from clerking, because I've seen so many different types of law that if somebody asks me something, I can immediately spot out the issues and whether or not I think they have a viable claim or not, you know, and I can watch different, you know, TV shows now, and I'm like, that is not accurate, even more so than I could before.
So would you say, and this may be a leap, that this clerkship has been one of the defining factors of your career so far?
Oh, without question. And I do know that my judge is probably going to watch this later, but I do have to say that working with judges, especially when you meet a judge who is a good person, that will change your life as an attorney, because you realize that you can be a good attorney and be a good person. and I have met that person in my life. So having met him and also getting the work experience I'm getting has just made this experience just one of the defining moments in my career. I can definitely say that that I won't forget it. One, these are Fifth Circuit clerkships. Any clerkship is something that you'll never forget. I won't forget my first one with Justice Wainwright or this one, but I will say that this has definitely redefined me as an attorney.
What have you learned from his leadership and decision-making process that you want to take with you? You told me he takes input.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know how a judge could do their job without somebody to consult with, because the challenges, the things that are put on their desk every day are really hard, and talking it out with somebody is really important. And there's so many legal research issues involved. It'd be very challenging for one person to do it by themselves. But I think the most important thing I've learned this year is the importance of putting my family first as a priority. And work will happen. Like one person a couple years ago told me this analogy that I finally understood, is that basically you have big rocks in your life. Those are your priorities. And pretend like you have a vase, right? And I don't know if you've heard this analogy before. And you put the big rocks in, and that's your family, God, whatever, education, whatever's important to you. And then everything else will fit in. You'll pour your water in, and that'll basically fill up the rest of it. But the important things will still have their place. And you'll get all your water in, but, the important things won't move. And I think, I've learned the importance of spending time with my boyfriend, calling my parents on a regular basis, my brother and sister, knowing what's going on in their lives. And the work happens. I get things done on time, but I make sure that I don't, move the things that are important to keeping me balanced. And I think that people are always like, oh, this person's successful and this, that, and the other. But usually the most successful people have their priorities in order. And you'll peel back the curtain and you'll see that they're happy with their families. And of course they have problems, but you'll see some function going on back there that's stable and stabilizes them to do good work.
You have spent your after high school life at a distance from your family, from West Texas to Alabama to Chicago to Houston and now to Shreveport. Why do you think at approximately age 30, 29 to 30, that those kind of mature thought processes and priority making has come together for you?
For me specifically? I'm not sure. I think a lot of things just sort of aligned, and I think that working as hard as I do, and being in Louisiana is like well, let me go back. I moved to Houston and I was sort of starting my life out. I got used to having access to my family on a regular basis, having, access to my boyfriend on a regular basis, my fur babies, my little pets, seeing them regularly. And I sort of got used to like a very regimented life and sort of had, I think, a pretty good work-life balance. And then I moved to Louisiana and I forgot what it was like to clerk. It's very intense work. And my judges always reminded me, like, you got to make sure that you spend time doing things outside of work to balance yourself out. And I didn't realize, I forgot what it was like to clerk and to be this intense with the work. I guess, that's what happened. Wow. I mean, if you look throughout history, you'll find that a lot of people around this age have life-changing events, not to get too biblical, but Jesus was around this age when he started doing a lot of his heavy, preaching, historians say miracles. People say he was about 35 when he was crucified. Martin Luther King, same thing. You'll find a lot of times in history that this is around the age, probably between 28 and 35, a lot of people start just coming into their own and realizing what's important to them. And I think for me, it was like the contrast of spending a lot of time with my family and then moving away from them. And, San Angelo is not easy to get to.
No.
It is not,
It's not.
It's like, I feel like I'm going on like, a trip, like a long trip to get here sometimes, even though it's a flight. But, it's hard to get here. And so coming home again makes me miss it. Like even flying in, it made me miss. I was like, looked out and didn't see any trees. Total contrast from Louisiana, where there's huge, beautiful trees. But there's beauty in West Texas, and like when you see it, you're like, you sort of get a feeling of comfort because you're like, I haven't seen this in a long time. Oh, I remember this, so.
Well, Zenobia, I hope you will be one of our first to come back a third time because it's been a year, and what a growing experience.
Absolutely.
It has been in a significantly positive way. And you knew it was going to be good, and it was such an honor for you to be chosen to do this clerkship. And the fact that your law firm was willing to wait to hold a spot for you during this time. So I know that the people at your law firm are going to be very pleased with your growth during this year, even though I thought you were pretty fabulous when you were here a year ago.
Thank you.
But your debate and how you were raised, let me go back further, how you were raised allowed in your home to develop opinions. And then you were professionally trained to debate, then went to a great law school with some good graduate work in between, and now this clerkship has really helped you to, okay, I can still have my opinions, but there are parameters that I can't cross. Even working the Texas Supreme Court, there's very strict rules because our judges were politicians and they ran for office. So there was strict rules about ethics and about things that we could say. But with the Fifth Circuit, it's even more so because, for example, we deal with the BP cases, and we deal with, like, Mark Cuban had a case in the Fifth Circuit. All this stuff happening in the Gulf. A lot of things that are really controversial happen in the Fifth Circuit and happen in all of the federal courts. Like we were talking earlier about the NFL case. You don't want your law clerks out there on Facebook typing up, I heard this motion and my judge said this and that. So there are very strict rules about, keeping your judge's confidence because he's our client for the year. And so that has been a very interesting experience for me because sometimes I feel a little covert, like when we travel to New Orleans to go to court, we're instructed that we have to keep our bench book, which has basically all the confidential information from all of the judges in it. We have to keep that with us at all times, like on the plane. And I think that's a great rule because, if that stuff gets out, it causes problem for the justice system, and how justice is adjudicated. But sometimes I feel like, sort of like I'm holding a national secret, so I keep my bench book with me at all times. But so there are some rules that go with that prevent me from, if I disagree with a court case, like putting out there on a blog or to go to this or that protest. But I think it's important to also to have this experience because you respect how the judiciary is separated from all things political, or at least it should be. That our personal beliefs should not go into our decision making. We should look at the law and interpret it as such. So I really appreciate that about this experience because, like I said earlier, even when I was in law school, I had a little dissonance. Like I didn't like the way this case turned out, but that shouldn't. My feelings about how things turn out should not impact the way I help my judge make his decisions. Wow.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I love practicing law. I can't tell you how much I love it because I really thought I was going to hate it. That first semester was rough, but I have really truly turned into like a very nerdy lawyer, and I'm so excited that I can do this for the rest of my life. I'm very lucky. Okay, now as you go this next year, you be thinking about some experiences, tuck them away that you can come back. And I don't mean specifics of cases, but just your growth and maturing as you go into this next year. Absolutely. We're so proud of you. What a great young woman you are. Thank you. Thank you, Zenobia. Oh, thanks for having me.